Archive 84, Atlantis. Part 1, The Island That Never Was. Former classification, restricted. Current classification, declassified with amendments. There are stories that refuse to disappear. Atlantis is one of them. For centuries, humans have searched for the lost civilization described by Plato. They have searched beneath oceans, around islands near volcanic formations, and occasionally in places where no sensible geological explanation suggested that an island had ever existed. The theories have varied considerably. Some proposed a forgotten civilization. Others proposed a catastrophe. Some suggested that Atlantis had been destroyed by an earthquake or volcanic eruption. And inevitably, some proposed extraterrestrials. The Cultural Containment Division was never particularly concerned. Atlantis was not extraterrestrial. It was not a lost, advanced civilization. And it was certainly not an ancient human empire that had somehow disappeared beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Atlantis, as described by Plato, never existed. That conclusion is actually quite straightforward. At some point in antiquity, a small island or coastal settlement was destroyed by a major geological event, probably associated with volcanic activity. People survived. They remembered what had happened, and they told the story. That was the beginning. Over generations, the story changed. The island became larger. The settlement became prosperous. Prosperity became power. Power became empire. And the destruction became increasingly dramatic. Eventually, the story reached Egypt, where, according to Plato, Solon heard an account of an ancient civilization beyond the Pillars of Heracles. Much later, Plato transformed the story into something considerably greater. This was not unusual. Plato had a particular talent for taking an idea and giving it architecture. By the time he finished with Atlantis, a small disaster had become the downfall of a powerful civilization. Complete with enormous wealth, impressive military forces, elaborate engineering, and a suitably dramatic disappearance. The original island had probably been much less impressive. There was no magnificent capital, no ancient superpower, no advanced technology, no extraterrestrial intervention. Just geology, human memory, and several centuries of storytelling. The division therefore classified Atlantis as cultural anomaly, non-operational. In practical terms, this meant, not our problem. For a very long time, it wasn't. Then during the late 20th century, something changed. Researchers began noticing that reports of mysterious islands did not always agree with the traditional Atlantis theories. Some sailors had reported seeing land in places where no land was supposed to exist. The explanations were usually mundane: navigational errors, poor charts, optical phenomena, or simply fishermen becoming lost and unwilling to admit it. But a small number of reports were different. They described a low island appearing in open ocean. It was not a mirage. It had physical boundaries. Sometimes witnesses reported vegetation. Sometimes they reported structures. And then, when another vessel returned to the same location, the island was gone. This attracted the attention of a familiar group: the conspiracists. A few began collecting the reports and comparing them with ancient accounts of Atlantis. Their theory was not especially original. Perhaps, they suggested, the ancient story had been mixed with later sightings. Perhaps the island had not disappeared permanently. Perhaps it had somehow moved. The division ignored them. We had learned long ago that human beings could construct remarkably elaborate theories from very little evidence. Then one of our analysts noticed something. The locations mentioned in several modern reports were not completely random. They were close to areas where our own surveillance systems had occasionally recorded unexplained electromagnetic activity. That was unfortunate. The analyst compared the reports with our historical records. Then he compared them again. The first result was coincidence. The second was probably coincidence. The third was no longer comfortable. Several reports described an island. The dates were different. The locations were different. But there was a pattern. Something appeared to be moving through the oceans. We initially considered a natural explanation. Then one of our satellites photographed it. The image was poor, partially obscured by cloud, but the object was unmistakable. A large flat structure was floating on the ocean. It was not geological. It was not human. And it was not Atlantis. It was a mobile extraterrestrial observation platform. We had known about extraterrestrial activity in the solar system for a very long time. What we had not known was that another civilization had been operating an oceanic installation in Sector 47-9S without our authorization. That created a jurisdictional problem. The jurisdictional problem created paperwork. The paperwork created several meetings. And the meetings eventually created my involvement. I was still a field officer at the time. During the first briefing, an analyst placed the satellite photograph in front of me. I studied it. Then I asked, "Why are humans calling this Atlantis?" "They aren't all calling it Atlantis," he replied. "Then what do they think it is?" He checked his notes. A secret military installation. A lost civilization. An underwater research facility. A weapons platform. He paused. One researcher believes it is a very large fishing vessel. I looked at the photograph again. It did not resemble a fishing vessel. Then the analyst displayed another image. This one showed the structure changing configuration. Sections of the platform were retracting beneath the water, while others extended outward. It was elegant engineering. Practical, modular, and completely beyond human capabilities at the time of the earliest sightings. I looked at the coordinates. Then I looked again. The location was familiar. We had monitored that region before. More importantly, the platform was no longer there. It had moved thousands of kilometers to a location where our records had never previously detected it. The room became quiet. The humans were wrong about Atlantis. Completely wrong. But somewhere in their increasingly complicated attempt to prove that an ancient legend was real, they had accidentally discovered something that was. And that was when Archive 84 ceased to be an investigation into a mythical civilization. It became an investigation into an island that moved. And much more importantly, into the question of who was moving it. Part 2, the manufactured ruins. The investigation became considerably simpler once we identified the operators of the platform. They were not military. They were researchers. Their installation had been studying Earth's oceans for several centuries, collecting biological samples, atmospheric data, and information about marine ecosystems. They had also been violating several Galactic Union regulations. When we confronted them, they were surprisingly cooperative. They admitted that humans had occasionally observed the platform. They had assumed the sightings would be dismissed as navigational errors. This assumption was reasonable. Humans had dismissed considerably stranger things. Unfortunately, the Atlantis theory was becoming more persistent. Several researchers were now comparing ancient accounts with modern reports of temporary islands. They were wrong about the connection, but they were approaching the truth about the platform. The division therefore had two problems. We could not allow humanity to discover the installation. And we could not simply remove the platform without explaining the sightings that had already accumulated. The operators were given a choice. They could abandon the mission immediately and leave us to deal with the consequences. Or they could repair the cultural contamination they had caused. They asked what that meant. The answer was surprisingly simple. They were ordered to build Atlantis. Not the real Atlantis. There was no real Atlantis. They were instructed to construct a convincing archaeological site on the ocean floor. Something ancient-looking, technologically useless, and sufficiently similar to Plato's descriptions to encourage humans to reach the wrong conclusion. The engineers were not enthusiastic. They requested specifications. We gave them Plato. The chief engineer studied the descriptions for several minutes. Then he asked which measurements are correct. None. He looked at me. Then what are we supposed to build? Something humans will believe. That was apparently enough. The resulting city was modest. A few stone columns, sections of streets, low walls, circular foundations, a ruined central structure. Nothing impressive, nothing functional, nothing that could reveal its true origin. We also selected the location carefully. It had to be somewhere humans had not already searched for Atlantis. The Atlantic was unsuitable. The Mediterranean was worse. Several other locations had already attracted too much attention. Eventually, we chose a remote region of the ocean with no significant historical association with the legend. The ruins were placed there. The platform was dismantled, its equipment removed, and its operators departed the solar system. We waited. For several years, nothing happened. Then a survey vessel detected something unusual on the seabed. The first interpretation was geological. The second was more interesting. The structures were artificial. A research expedition followed. Then another. Photographs appeared. So did arguments. Some researchers dismissed the structures as modern. Others believed they represented an unknown ancient culture. And inevitably, someone suggested the word we had been waiting for. Atlantis. The division considered the operation successful. The humans had found ruins. They had found them in a location nobody had previously associated with Atlantis. They had no reason to suspect extraterrestrial involvement. And the original legend now had a physical mystery to sustain it for another few centuries. There was only one thing we had failed to anticipate. The ruins did not end the search. They made it much larger. And that was when the real problem began. Part 3, somewhere else. Once the ruins were discovered, the Atlantis debate became more active than ever. The discovery was immediately challenged. Some researchers argued that the structures were too recent. Others insisted they were ancient. Some claimed they were natural formations. Others proposed that the site was only one part of a much larger civilization. The important thing was that everyone was looking at the ruins, exactly as we intended. Then the reports from the real island started again. A fishing vessel in another ocean reported seeing a strange landmass. The coordinates were recorded. The description was familiar. Low vegetation, unusual geometric structures, a faint mechanical sound. And then, before the crew could investigate, the island disappeared. We checked the coordinates. The platform was there. For the first time, we realized that our solution had created an unexpected advantage. Humans now had a perfectly plausible explanation for any future sighting. They would assume they had found another clue to Atlantis. We did not need to hide every sighting. We simply needed to make sure that humans interpreted it incorrectly. The platform's operators eventually returned to Earth. We informed them that their previous expedition had created a considerable amount of confusion. They replied that we had instructed them to construct an archaeological site. We reminded them that the site had been necessary because of their unauthorized observations. They pointed out that the humans had discovered it. We agreed. They then asked whether the operation had been successful. I told them that thousands of humans were now searching for a city that had never existed. They seemed satisfied. So were we. The system worked surprisingly well. Whenever a new theory appeared, the search moved somewhere else. The Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, the Pacific, underwater plateaus, volcanic islands, ancient coastlines. Every new possibility attracted researchers documentaries, expeditions, and arguments. Meanwhile, the actual platform continued moving through the oceans. It was occasionally seen. It was occasionally photographed. And it was occasionally mistaken for Atlantis. The irony was difficult to explain to anyone outside the division. The humans believed they were searching for a mythical civilization. We knew there was no civilization. The ruins were ours. The legend was theirs. But the island they occasionally saw was real. That is why Archive 84 remains one of my favorite cases. Atlantis never existed. There was no lost empire, no ancient superpower, no advanced civilization waiting beneath the ocean. Plato had inherited an old human story about a disaster and transformed it into something extraordinary. That part is entirely human. The ruins discovered centuries later are different. They were deliberately constructed. They were placed there so humanity would find them. And as far as the Cultural Containment Division is concerned, the arrangement is still useful. There is no reason to correct a misunderstanding when the misunderstanding is protecting something considerably more important. The real island is still somewhere out there. It has no fixed location. It has no connection to Plato. And it has never been Atlantis. It is simply an extraterrestrial research platform moving quietly across Earth's oceans. So if you are still searching for Atlantis, I have some disappointing news. You will never find it. But I would not recommend giving up on mysterious islands entirely. You may simply be looking in the wrong place. Archive 84 closed.